In the heart of a bustling city, where the glittering windows of restaurants promised every guest refined pleasure, one evening a black man named Michael walked in. His suit fit flawlessly. His movements were calm and confident. He took a seat by the window and ordered Lobster, a symbol of luxury, a sign that he was accustomed to having the best. The hall was full, yet all eyes seemed to linger on him too long, some with curiosity, others with cold suspicion. The waiters, as if reluctant to approach, kept their distance. Only one waitress, a young woman named Letitia, dared to come closer. She placed a glass of water on the table and, as if by chance, laid a napkin folded in such a way that Michael's eyes caught it immediately. On the inside, he found hastily written words. "Don't eat. They spat in your dish." Michael froze. The world around him went on in its usual rhythm. The clinking of glasses, quiet laughter, hushed conversations. But for him, everything changed in a second. Someone whispered behind him, waiters exchanged glances in the corner, and the chef, peeking from the kitchen, quickly turned away. The atmosphere grew heavy, thick. It wasn't just an insult, but humiliation hidden in the act that loomed over him. He didn't make a single sudden move. His face remained unreadable, his gaze calm. But inside, a fire raged. In this simple situation reflected something far bigger than casual rudeness. It was the reflection of prejudice, mistrust, and contempt he had encountered many times before. Letitia stood nearby, her eyes betraying anxiety and compassion. She understood her gesture was a risk. But to stay silent, to watch someone be served a dish laced with humiliation, she could not. Michael carefully folded the napkin, slipped it into his pocket, and leaned back in his chair. He knew that what was beginning now was a story far more serious than an ordinary dinner. Michael Brown was not just a man accustomed to luxury. He was one of those who had broken through every barrier the world set before him. His childhood unfolded in a poor neighborhood, where every morning was a battle for survival. But from an early age he stood out with his intellect and persistence, reading books while others lingered on the streets, dreaming of his own projects while his classmates dreamt of quick money. Over time, he built an investment fund that became a lifeline for dozens of young entrepreneurs. His name was known on Wall Street. He was invited to global economic forums. He was a billionaire, a man whose wealth could buy entire companies and launch massive projects. Yet, unlike many others, Michael never forgot where he came from. His foundation helped students from disadvantaged neighborhoods get into universities, opened schools, and medical centers. For many, he was a symbol that a black man could reach the top despite all prejudice and obstacles. The restaurant he found himself in that evening also belonged to him. It was one link in his vast chain of establishments worldwide, part of a business that brought profit and created jobs. But the staff of this place didn't know that. To them, he was just a guest who doesn't look like someone who usually orders lobster. Michael noticed every detail. The bartender's skeptical raised eyebrow. The administrator's held breath at the sight of his expensive watch. The chef spit in the food, convinced no one would ever know. All of it was a reflection of hidden discrimination, masked by polite smiles and false courtesy. He wasn't going to make a scene, but neither could he leave it unchallenged. The situation demanded a response, one that would serve as a lesson not only for those who dared to humiliate him, but for everyone who believed appearances could define a person's worth. Michael understood. The moment had come when power and wealth had to meet the simplest, deepest principle dignity. That evening, he rose from the table without touching the lobster. His stride was as confident as when he first walked in. Letitia caught his gaze once more, and he gave her the slightest nod, a wordless gratitude she instantly understood. He walked toward the exit, and silence fell over the hall. No one knew what would happen next. No one guessed that this man was the owner of the restaurant, the master of these walls, this staff, the menu, and the rules. But soon they would find out. Letitia had been working at this restaurant for almost 2 years. For her, it wasn't just a job, but the only way to pay for her younger brother's education and help her ailing mother. She knew every regular customer, could read their moods by their eyes and smiles. But that evening, when a man in a simple shirt and jeans, wearing plain brown shoes, walked into the hall, her heart skipped a beat. She recognized him. Despite the fact that outwardly Michael looked like the most ordinary guest, no tie, no bodyguards, no pompous display of wealth, there was something unique about him. A calm confidence, restrained strength, that quiet aura which only comes from people who have reached the summit. Letitia had seen his photographs in the news and in business magazines. She remembered an article about how he had donated millions to build schools for black children in poor neighborhoods. That was what gave him away, the kind of virtue that didn't need the shine of a suit. She immediately realized that the other staff didn't know who he was. To them, he was just another black man who happened to wander into an expensive restaurant. Their condescending glances, whispered remarks, lazy service, all of it burned inside her. But when she heard the crude words of the chef in the kitchen and saw him smirk as he spat into the lobster meant for Michael, something inside her broke. Letitia knew if Michael learned about this from someone else, the consequences would be catastrophic. But if he left, never knowing, then this vile injustice would remain hidden. So she made her choice. The risk was enormous. She could be fired, accused of betraying her team. But she couldn't stay silent. She wrote a short note on a napkin, pouring both fear and hope into it. "Don't eat, they spat in your dish." And she slipped it to him so only he would see. When Michael received the napkin, he showed not the slightest emotion at first, but in his mind, the puzzle assembled instantly. He was used to veiled hostility. In business meetings, he was sometimes mistaken for an assistant instead of the owner. His successes were often dismissed as luck instead of hard work. But today, it wasn't about words. It was about actions that stripped dignity. Unlike most billionaires, Michael never sought to stand out with appearances. He considered ostentatious luxury a sign of inner emptiness. He liked dressing simply jeans, a neat shirt, a watch without diamonds. Even his cars were modest. He drove a quiet electric vehicle, preferring silence over the roar of engines. But it was precisely this simplicity that made him unpredictable to others. People who judged by appearances saw him as just another black man, not as someone whose name appeared on lists of the most influential in the world. Michael understood the value of a mask. His strength lay in being invisible among people who thought they knew everything about him. This was how he learned the truth about how his companies functioned, how employees behaved when they believed no one important was watching. This restaurant was part of the Browns dining group he had founded several years earlier. For him, it wasn't just a business, but a social project. He opened establishments in different cities, creating jobs for those who struggled to find work. He hired young people without experience, gave chances to those others rejected. But now he realized that even within his own walls, hatred and prejudice could take root. Letitia, standing a little distance away, kept watching him. She feared he might cause a scene, point directly at her, and then she'd have to face her colleagues. But instead, Michael calmly folded the napkin, slipped it into his pocket, and slowly took a sip of water. His face remained composed. It was as though he was testing not only the staff's behavior, but also his own heart. Was he ready to face again what he had once believed was left behind? Michael remembered his youth. He was 17 when he was first humiliated in a cafe. The waiter deliberately refused to serve his table while white customers received their meals one after another. That day, he left with clenched teeth, promising himself that one day he would own his own business, where no one would ever experience the same. And now, years later, in his very own restaurant, the same thing was happening again. Only this time, he wasn't a poor teenager, but a billionaire, the owner of dozens of companies and hundreds of restaurants. He rose from the table once more, without touching the food. His eyes met Letitia's, and she saw not anger, but respect. She had taken a risk, and he valued it. but no one else around them knew that at this very moment their fate was being decided. Not the bartender lazily polishing glasses, not the chef chuckling in the kitchen, not the administrator already speculating why the strange guest was leaving without ordering anything more. They all continued living in the certainty that he was just a customer. But in reality, they were standing before the man who held the future of the entire restaurant in his hands. The story was only just beginning. After he left the hall, the waiters and the administrator sighed in relief, convinced that the strange guest would never return. But Michael hadn't gone far. He sat in his car by the curb, turned on the light of his tablet, and made several notes. His act was quiet but deliberate. He intended to remember every detail, every face, every gesture. This wasn't anger. It was the methodical work of a man accustomed to solving problems systematically. A few minutes later, he entered the restaurant again, but not through the main doors. Circling the building, he went to the service entrance where staff usually smoked and took breaks. His clothing helped, and ordinary shirt and jeans didn't make him stand out. No one could have guessed that this man had the authority to demand a meeting with the manager. He approached the security guard and calmly but firmly said he wanted to speak with the manager about a serious incident. His tone was so confident that the guard didn't even think of arguing. He simply nodded and led him down the corridor. The restaurant manager, a man named Kenneth, was sitting in his office lazily flipping through reports. When the guard mentioned a visitor, he frowned irritably but still invited him in. Michael walked in, closed the door behind him, and sat down opposite. He spoke measuredly, without emotion, as though recording facts. He recounted that he had witnessed waiters whispering and snickering, that he had heard crude remarks from the kitchen, and that one of the staff had spat into his order. He emphasized that such behavior was no accident, but a reflection of the atmosphere reigning among the team. Kenneth tried to brush it off. Clients often exaggerated. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the waiters were simply chatting among themselves. But Michael stopped him with his gaze. That look was heavier than any words. Then he said quietly, yet firmly, "I want you to show me the surveillance footage." The manager hesitated. The thought flashed through his mind. Who is this man, and what right does he have to demand access to the recordings? But the inner sense of power radiating from his guest prevented him from arguing. He contacted the technician, and within minutes the office monitor began playing footage from the dining hall and kitchen. Michael watched intently. On screen, the chef, holding the lobster plate, made a contemptuous grimace, and then, turning aside, performed the vile act. The camera then caught his smirk and the reactions of other staff. Some looked away, others chuckled. The hall footage told its own story. The waiters exchanged glances and delayed approaching his table. The bartender served half-heartedly. The administrator observed with obvious bias. Every move, every look confirmed this wasn't coincidence, but a systemic issue. Michael remained silent. He didn't show emotion, didn't shake his head, didn't scold. He just watched. And that silence frightened Kenneth more than any shouting would have. After the viewing, Michael asked for recordings from the service exit and waiting area as well. He was checking how the staff behaved when they thought no one was watching. Once again, the footage revealed scenes laced with hostility and mockery. "Save these recordings," he finally said, "and don't tell anyone we watched them." His tone left Kenneth no choice but to obey. Michael stood, thanked him, and left the office. The guard escorting him through the corridor kept trying to figure out who this man was. Yet there was nothing unusual about him. No pomp, no display of authority. And that was precisely what made him so confusing. Meanwhile, in the hall, the waiters discussed the guest's departure. Some sneered, "Probably couldn't afford the bill." Others guessed he got scared. Only Letitia stayed silent, staring anxiously at the door. She knew he wasn't who her colleagues thought. She knew something far more serious was unfolding. Michael stepped outside, sat in his car again, and added another entry on his tablet. He listed point by point. The chef's behavior, the waiter's reactions, the administrator's inaction. He worked like an investigator gathering evidence, but the main truth remained hidden, his real role. The next day, he returned to the restaurant. This time during the day, when the hall was full of new guests, he ordered only a cup of coffee. The waiters once again treated him without proper respect, adding another stroke to the picture. He observed, recorded, noting how the staff behaved toward customers of different skin colors, how their smiles varied between insiders and outsiders. He was collecting facts, coldly, methodically. He needed not just to catch someone in prejudice, but to show the scale of the problem. None of the staff realized that every gesture was being recorded not only by the cameras, but also in the memory of the man who would soon change their fate. He still hadn't revealed his identity, but the time for that was approaching. The story was only beginning to unfold. On the third day after the incident, the atmosphere in the restaurant was no longer the same. Letitia walked cautiously, sensing that something was brewing. In the hall, everything looked as usual. Guests ordered expensive dishes, music played unobtrusively, waiters smiled. But the smiles had become forced. It seemed as though a tension hung in the air that no one could put into words. In the middle of the evening, the door swung open, and the same man walked in. His appearance caused an immediate reaction. The waiters stiffened. The administrator pretended to be busy with other guests. They hadn't expected to see him again, let alone for the third day in a row. Michael sat at the same table by the window and calmly ordered coffee and dessert. This time he wasn't refused, but no effort was made either. The waiter brought the order without a smile, as if performing a formality. Nearby tables began whispering. Some guests noticed the staff's hostile looks, and the tension in the hall began to rise. After a while, the manager Kenneth appeared in the hall. He walked quickly, scanning the room. His face was full of irritation. Just last night, this unknown guest had insisted on viewing the cameras, and now he was sitting here again. To Kenneth, it felt like a deliberate provocation. He approached Michael's table and leaned in, speaking a few words that were polite on the surface but full of hidden threat. Silence fell across the hall. The guests grew alert, realizing a scandal was about to erupt. Michael answered calmly and briefly. His voice was quiet, but filled with such confidence that many turned their heads. He said he knew about what happened in the kitchen, that he knew what had been done to his order during his previous visit, and that such things were unacceptable. Kenneth tried to deny it, claiming it was just rumors and misunderstandings. But at that moment, Letitia intervened. She could no longer stay silent. Standing by the table, she said loudly that she was the one who had left the note, that she had seen the chef ruin the dish, and that it had all been done intentionally. Her words struck the hall like thunder. Guests gasped. Several people pulled out their phones and began recording. The conflict had now slipped out of control. It had become public. The chef, hearing her confession, burst out of the kitchen, trying to justify himself. Instead, he raised his voice, shouting that nothing happened, and that it's all lies. His face flushed red, his hands shook, and every gesture only made him look guiltier. Other waiters whispered more loudly. Some sided with Letitia, others defended the chef. The administrator tried to calm the guests, but it was too late. Chaos reigned. Customers recorded videos, posted them online, argued with each other. Some were outraged that such things could happen in an expensive restaurant. Others accused the staff of racism. Michael sat quietly, as if watching a play he himself had set in motion. He didn't intervene, but his very presence poured fuel on the fire. Everyone understood. This man was not random. His demeanor was too confident, too composed for an ordinary guest. Kenneth tried to seize control of the situation. He threatened Letitia with dismissal for slander, ordered everyone back to work, and declared that the restaurant will not tolerate baseless accusations. But at that very moment, one of the guests, noticing the camera footage at the administrator's desk, loudly remarked that such evidence couldn't be hidden. Now everyone felt the truth was closer than they thought. Letitia didn't back down. Her voice trembled, but she repeated again and again, "I saw it. I wrote to him. I couldn't do otherwise." Several guests applauded, supporting her courage. The hall erupted into a storm. Guests argued with the staff, waiters argued among themselves. Kenneth lost control. The chef, nearly shouting, tried to defend himself, but every cry sounded like a confession. Through it all, Michael sat motionless. His coffee grew cold, the spoon in the dessert untouched. He was waiting. For him, this wasn't merely a clash between a waitress and a chef, but a mirror reflecting the inner atmosphere of the entire staff. He saw who laughed, who stayed silent, who stood for justice. He read in their faces far more than words could reveal. When the police arrived, someone from the guests had called, "The conflict reached a new level." Kenneth rushed to meet them, insisting everything was under control, that it was just a misunderstanding. But inside, the storm hadn't ceased. The officers entered and began asking questions. Letitia spoke first, firmly repeating everything she had said before. Several guests confirmed they had heard the whispers and seen the staff's behavior. The surveillance recordings became the center of attention. Everyone wanted them checked. Michael stood up from the table and walked toward the door. His departure passed in complete silence. Even the police and the heated quarrels couldn't drown out his steps. People followed him with their eyes, not understanding who he was and why his presence seemed to hold everyone in such tension. He left the scene at the peak of conflict, knowing that now the truth could no longer be hidden. But no one yet realized that the man who quietly exited the restaurant was the one who owned every wall, every chair, every lamp under that ceiling. From the outside, the restaurant looked as elegant as ever. The glow of display windows, the soft shine of the sign, the stream of cars passing by. But inside, chaos reigned. Police officers were questioning the staff, taking guest statements, while some clients stormed out, slamming the door in anger. Those who remained watched the scene with fascination, as if they were at a theatre performance. Kenneth, the manager, frantically tried to smooth things over. He assured the police that it was all just the result of a waitress's emotional outburst, that the chef was innocent, and that the guest had simply misunderstood her. His voice was nervous, faltering, and even the restaurant staff began to look at him with doubt. Letitia stood upright, though her hands trembled. She repeated everything again. Yes, she had seen the chef insult the guest. Yes, she had written the note because she couldn't stay silent. The police recorded her words, and with each repetition, her voice grew louder and more confident. Guests supported her. Several confirmed they had noticed suspicious looks and heard inappropriate comments from the staff. For the police, this was enough to demand access to the surveillance recordings. In Kenneth's office, the screens came on. Police officers and a technician combed through the archive. The minutes dragged painfully. Employees crowded near the door, exchanging glances. And then the footage appeared. The very thing Kenneth dreaded most. The chef's smirk and degrading gesture, the waiter's stifling laughter, and the entire sequence of events Letitia had described. Kenneth tried to stop the playback, but it was too late. The police had already seen what mattered. One of them raised an eyebrow and simply asked, "This is your staff?" The manager fell silent. Meanwhile, Michael still sat in the hall. He didn't intervene, didn't participate in the discussions, but his calm presence was felt by everyone. He watched as the truth came to light, as lies lost their power. He didn't need defending events were aligning so that everyone could see the obvious. Some guests approached him, offering comfort or help, thinking he was just a lone victim, an unfortunate customer humiliated by chance. He only nodded politely, remaining silent. No one suspected that it was already his gaze measuring the future of the entire establishment. The chef, realizing his actions had been caught on camera, began shouting about a setup. He accused Letitia, insisting it was all a trap, that the video could have been edited. But his hysteria sounded less and less convincing. Colleagues turned away, while guests filmed every word on their phones. One of the officers calmly said, "You'll be coming with us." That was the breaking point. Exclamations echoed through the hall. Some applauded, others shook their heads, but no one remained indifferent. The restaurant had stopped being a place of leisure and turned into an arena where, before everyone's eyes, long-held illusions were collapsing. Kenneth tried to regain control. He shouted that he would not tolerate slander, that the restaurant's reputation was in danger, that all guilty parties would be punished later without outside interference. But the police were already at work. They demanded staff lists, access to archives, and the contacts of the network's owners. The name of the owner was spoken for the first time, Brown's Dining Group. But for most present, it meant nothing more than mild surprise. Only Letitia glanced at Michael for a moment and realized the pieces were starting to form a single picture. Meanwhile, rumors spread at lightning speed. Videos of the incident were already appearing on social media, with the first comments full of accusations of discrimination. In just hours, the restaurant was at the center of a scandal that neither Kenneth's shouting nor the chef's excuses could stop. Guests leaving the hall gave statements to journalists who had begun arriving at the building. Photographers' flashes flickered. Passers-by stopped to watch. It was no longer a local problem before everyone's eyes. A story was being born that would make the headlines tomorrow. Michael rose from his table once again. He did so as calmly as before. His steps were slow but full of confidence. Letitia followed him with her eyes, without saying a word. She knew her risk had not been in vain. He walked out, the door slamming behind him. Inside, the restaurant still roiled the police filing reports, Kenneth pacing, the chef being led away. But none of it mattered anymore. The process had begun, and nothing could stop it. To everyone else, he was still just an unknown guest, a victim of injustice. No one yet realized that within the coming days, this very man would decide the fate of each of them. The story wasn't over. It was only entering the phase where consequences would take on real power. The next morning, the restaurant woke up surrounded by cameras and reporters. Newspapers and websites competed with headlines. Scandal in an elite restaurant. Racism in the city center. Guest humiliated by staff. The video that exposed the truth. The footage from the dining hall, where Letitia boldly declared the chef had spat in the dish and the cook was led out by police, was already gaining millions of views. The police confirmed that an investigation was underway, though no official conclusions had been drawn. That didn't stop the public. Debates raged on social media. Some condemned the restaurant, others defended the right to doubt. But the majority of comments were clear humiliation based on skin color was unacceptable. Kenneth, in a panic, tried to save the restaurant's reputation. He ordered a press release claiming it was a misunderstanding and misinterpreted employee actions. But the public met the statement with ridicule. The online consensus was simple. Surveillance footage doesn't lie. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere had become unbearable. The staff split into two camps. Some supported Letitia, others hated her for betraying her own. Every day brought arguments and accusations, turning daily work into chaos. Fewer customers came, and many reservations were cancelled. Those who did show up looked at the waiters with suspicion. Sometimes guests would pointedly ask, "Are you sure our food is okay?" And it sounded like a sentence. Meanwhile, Michael kept moving quietly, without grand statements. He started with the lawyers, contacting his team without revealing details and asking them to review all of the restaurant's contracts. Then he reached out to an auditing firm, instructing them to examine the financial records. To the staff and to Kenneth, all this looked like external pressure from investors, but no one understood where it was really coming from. Michael also met with the police outside the restaurant. He handed over copies of the surveillance footage, which the technician had saved in advance. His words were precise and concise. He described not only the incident itself, but also the atmosphere within the team that had allowed it to happen. He spoke as a witness, but thought as a strategist. The scandal kept escalating. Evening talk shows dissected the story, invited experts, and asked how such a thing was possible in the 21st century. Some hosts argued it wasn't an isolated case, but a symptom of deeper problems in society. Letitia became a media heroine. Her testimony was broadcast on television, her courage discussed by bloggers. But fame brought threats too. Colleagues pressured her. Insults surfaced online. She held firm, but every evening she returned home with the sense that her life would never be the same again. Kenneth realized that if nothing was done, the restaurant would lose everything. He gathered the staff, trying to turn them against the customer who started it all. He called him a provocateur, claimed it was a set-up. But the louder he shouted, the more waiters doubted his words. Some began to wonder, why did this man keep coming back? Why did he watch everything so calmly, as though waiting for the masks to fall away? Rumours multiplied. Some believed he was an undercover journalist, others that he was a wealthy activist testing restaurants. But none of the guesses came close to the truth. Meanwhile, Michael took another step. He returned to the restaurant one evening, but not as a guest. Sitting in his car across the street, he spent hours watching who entered and left, how employees behaved after shifts. He saw the dismissed chef gathering colleagues by the service entrance, urging them not to break. He saw Kenneth speaking to reporters, lying that the restaurant wasn't connected to Brown's dining group, hoping to salvage his own career. Michael recorded every detail. One night, he entered the restaurant after closing. The guard, weary of the endless scandals and eager for order, let him in. Inside was silence, the smell of cleaning agents, and the cold steel of kitchen stoves. Michael walked through the hall, ran his hand along the back of the chair where he had sat that night, and mentally returned to the moment he received the napkin with the note. He knew the truth was already out, but final judgment required time. He wasn't rushing to reveal himself. Let the staff show their true faces to the end. Let each of them choose, stand with justice, or continue excusing humiliation. Outside, society boiled. Each day brought new articles, new talk shows, new investigations. Activists protested outside the restaurant. TV crews camped there day and night. And all this time, Michael remained in the shadows. To some, he was just an anonymous victim. To others, a silent witness. But no one knew that he, quietly and methodically, was preparing the move that would decide the fate of everyone involved in this story. The story was approaching a new turning point, but his name still remained offstage. The scandal around the restaurant grew like an avalanche. What had started with a single episode had now become a subject of national debate. Journalists discovered that the restaurant belonged to a large chain and immediately demanded comments from the management. The press office issued only dry statements. "We are investigating the incident. We apologize to our clients. We will not tolerate discrimination." These words rang hollow. Society wanted action. Complaints began pouring into regulators. The Department of Health suddenly announced inspections of sanitary conditions in all branches of the chain. The Consumer Protection Agency demanded documents on staff management. Activist lawyers were already preparing class action lawsuits. On television, a well-known civil rights advocate said, "This case isn't about one waiter or one chef. It's about a system that allows such things to happen." That same evening, a crowd of protesters gathered at the restaurant's doors. Signs, chants, loudspeakers. People demanded justice. Police kept order, but the reputational damage had already been done. Inside the chain itself, panic began. Managers of other restaurants called Kenneth and one another, complaining about cancelled reservations, angry customers, and waiters afraid to go out on the floor. In some branches, employees began resigning, unwilling to work for a company the media now called a symbol of hidden racism. Kenneth tried to hold on, but his authority was collapsing before everyone's eyes. When journalists caught him outside the entrance again, he stumbled over his words, and the phrase, "We can't guarantee anything," spread across all the news feeds. Michael observed all this from the sidelines, as though it were a chess game. He saw how one mistake led to another, how the system was dismantling itself. He didn't need to intervene. The events were working in his favor. But he wasn't idle. His team had already begun a quiet financial audit of the chain. Auditors found suspicious expenses, shady procurement schemes, fictitious contracts. Michael compiled it all into a single dossier. He understood. A reputational blow was only the beginning. To cleanse the system, everything rotten inside had to be exposed. Meanwhile, Letitia, who had become a symbol of resistance, continued to work. Despite the pressure and threats, she went out into the hall, serving guests who now recognized her and thanked her for her courage. Sometimes someone gave her flowers, sometimes people applauded, and these moments gave her strength. But on the other side were whispers behind her back and cold stares from colleagues who blamed her for turning their lives into a nightmare. Michael watched her especially closely. He saw in her the same determination that had once lifted him up. And he understood. People like her must endure, not break under pressure. One evening, an unexpected visitor appeared in the restaurant, a representative of the city administration. He announced that by order of the mayor, all restaurants in the chain would be temporarily closed until the investigation was complete. Uproar erupted in the hall. Waiters argued. Clients demanded explanations. The administrator tried frantically to call upstairs. But the decision was final. The restaurant emptied. And at that very moment, the real storm began. The media seized the news, and within an hour, the leading channels reported, Brown's Dining Group suspends operations at all locations. For Kenneth, it was a crushing blow. He shouted that this was the end, that the customer destroyed everything. But no one listened anymore. Even his closest aides turned away, realizing the manager's days were numbered. That night, the restaurant stood empty. Outside, only the glow of streetlights and the hum of passing cars. Inside, silence and the feeling of an ending. But Michael, sitting in his car across the street, looked at the dark windows and thought differently. For him, this wasn't the end, but the beginning. The beginning of a new stage, when everything hidden in the shadows would come to light. Society kept demanding answers. On talk shows, experts debated whether the chain should exist at all. Journalists dug into the company's past, uncovering new episodes of bias toward customers. Each day, the scandal spread wider, like ripples on water. And at the center of this storm remained the nameless man whose calmness contrasted with the panic around him. No one yet knew that he was holding all the strings, that he had a plan, with every event falling into its place. His name remained a secret, but the time to reveal it was drawing near. After the temporary closure of the Brown's Dining Group restaurants, pressure on the company's leadership only grew stronger. Society no longer saw the case as an isolated incident. Journalists began digging deeper, and each new day brought fresh revelations. First, a local newspaper published the story of an African-American couple who had been thrown out of one of the chain's suburban branches a year earlier. The administrator had justified the refusal by citing inappropriate clothing, even though other customers dressed similarly had been seated without issue. The article was accompanied by photographs. A young woman crying outside the restaurant doors, while her husband argued with a security guard. This publication sparked a wave of memories. People began sharing their own experiences on social media en masse. One man described how a waiter at another branch had sarcastically told him, "Our dishes are very expensive. Are you sure you can afford them?" A woman recalled being forced to wait half an hour for a table, even though the dining hall was half empty. Another customer remembered how his friends were denied a reservation with the excuse that there were no seats, only to watch a white couple seated at the same table minutes later. These testimonies built a picture that could no longer be ignored. The brand was becoming associated not with luxury and quality, but with prejudice and hidden racism. Television launched a full investigation. Journalists traveled to branches and interviewed former employees. They confessed, yes, prejudice was often present inside the staff. Sometimes new waiters were even told outright to pay more attention to certain customers and not smile too widely at others. One former chef said in an interview, "We used to joke in the kitchen. If a black customer came in, someone would always say, 'Pretend you mixed up the order.' People laughed as if it were harmless, but it wasn't a joke. It poisoned the atmosphere." At the same time, stories about the employees themselves began to surface. Several young waiters admitted that they too had faced discrimination within the team. They were kept in secondary roles, denied good shifts, and told that faces like yours shouldn't be greeting guests at the entrance. These revelations hit the company's reputation even harder. Now it wasn't just about customers, it was about the people who worked under those signs. Talk shows read messages from viewers. Human rights experts, lawyers, and activist representatives filled the studio chairs. Everyone agreed on one thing. The restaurant chain needed radical reform, or it had no place in modern society. Activists staged new pickets. The slogans now demanded not only justice for the customer, but also justice for the workers. Outside several branches, crowds gathered, demanding the restaurants be shut down entirely. Inside the company, chaos reigned. Top managers held emergency meetings, discussing crisis strategies. Some proposed sacrificing a couple of branches by closing them permanently. Others insisted on a loud PR campaign promising reforms. But all of it sounded like belated attempts to put out a fire that had already engulfed the house. Kenneth felt his days were numbered. Colleagues openly blamed him for letting the crisis escalate. Employees submitted anonymous complaints upstairs, accusing him of covering up problems. He tried to defend himself, saying he couldn't have foreseen this, but his words were drowned out by the roar of accusations. And Michael kept watching. Every new fact, every article, every testimony from former employees became another piece of the picture he was assembling in his mind. He recalled his own humiliations. How, in his youth, he was once refused entry to a restaurant with the words, "We have a club atmosphere here. You wouldn't feel comfortable." How, in college, a waiter sneered, "We only accept cards, cash won't do," even though the menu clearly stated otherwise. These stories were personal, and so he understood the pain of those now sharing their experiences. Letitia had become a symbol of resistance. She received messages of gratitude and letters of support. On social media, people wrote, "She was the only one brave enough to tell the truth." But with that came threats as well. Some anonymous voices accused her of ruining others' careers, of shaming the company. Despite it all, she kept working. Her resilience earned respect even from those who had once doubted her choice. Meanwhile, journalists dug further. At one branch, they uncovered an audio recording of an administrator instructing staff. "If a customer looks too ordinary, send them to the bar instead of the main dining area. We need a certain type of clientele." The recording was a bombshell. It proved this wasn't about random incidents, but about internal policy. All of this formed a picture of systemic discrimination. Public outrage boiled. Protests at the restaurants continued. Crowds gathered outside the company's offices, reporters waiting at the doors. And at the center of this storm still stood the man everyone thought was merely the victim of the first incident. A quiet man in a simple shirt, who had walked into a restaurant and observed. No one suspected that he was preparing the decisive move. The story remained unfinished. The board of directors of Brown's Dining Group convened an emergency meeting. It was held in a closed conference room, thick with unease. Around the long table sat people who were used to discussing only profits, new branches, and expansion plans. Now the agenda was dominated by a single crisis that threatened to destroy everything they had built over decades. The meeting minutes opened with dry numbers. A 45 drop in revenue in just 1 week, hundreds of cancelled reservations, the company's stock value collapsing on the exchange. But the central issue wasn't money. The central issue was a word hanging in the air like a sentence: discrimination. The chairman of the board spoke first. His voice sounded weary. We can't keep explaining this away as an isolated incident. This is a systemic crisis. The media continues to publish client stories, and each one erodes trust further. Others nodded. One reminded the group about the recording of an administrator explicitly talking about needing a certain clientele. Another pointed out that the wave of staff resignations had already jeopardized operations at several branches. The room fell silent when one director said flatly, "We've lost control of our own company." All fingers pointed to Kenneth. He was blamed for everything. For not quelling the conflict at the start, for allowing the police to seize the surveillance footage, for letting the press scandal explode. Kenneth defended himself, claiming he had done everything possible and that no one could have foreseen the scale. But his words sounded weaker with every attempt. Finally, someone said bluntly, "We must find those responsible for creating this atmosphere. Otherwise, the company is finished." Meanwhile, journalists kept digging. A news investigation aired, presenting several stories back to back. At one branch, a black woman was forced to move to the far corner with the excuse that the tables by the window were reserved, though an hour later, a white couple without a reservation was seated there. At another, a man was denied service under the pretext of kitchen problems, while people at the next table enjoyed their meals without issue. At a third branch, a young waiter was fired simply for chatting too often with customers of another nationality, the administrator calling it bad form. Individually, these incidents might have seemed small. Together, they painted a horrifying system, a network where prejudice was the norm. Public pressure demanded harsh measures. Activists called for all restaurants in the chain to be shut down. Petitions gathered tens of thousands of signatures. On social media, the company's hashtag had turned into a symbol of discrimination. The authorities could not stay silent. Senators and mayors issued statements. One politician declared outright, "This isn't just a scandal. This is a challenge to all of us. We must show that such behavior is unacceptable." Meanwhile, Michael continued working in the shadows. His lawyers collected evidence. Auditors combed through every line of reports. Analysts tracked media trends. Everything was fitting into a single strategy. He knew the crisis had reached the point where change was inevitable. The only question was, who would lead it? The board of directors continued to argue. Some demanded the immediate sale of part of the business to save what remained of its reputation. Others called for scapegoats to be named and publicly fired. But none of these measures could stop the avalanche. "We are losing trust," said one of the board's senior members. "Without trust, there are no clients, no partners, no investors. We need not to patch the hole, but to rebuild the system entirely." The words hung in the air. No one disagreed. Behind the scenes, whispers began that the owners had to intervene personally. But no one knew exactly where they were or what they thought. Michael's name still wasn't connected to the chain publicly. He remained a figure in the shadows, known only to a few. Only Letitia still felt his presence. She remembered his calm gaze, his silent strength, and she understood. He was not an ordinary man. She sensed that he was watching everything, waiting for the moment when the masks would finally fall. Meanwhile, the crisis became international. Foreign media picked up the story. Protests broke out at branches in other countries. Business partners threatened to sever contracts. Banks that had once financed the company began pulling their support. The company was cracking at the seams. And all this time, at the center of it all, stood one man in a simple shirt and jeans, whose name no one spoke. He watched as the system crumbled and knew the moment of truth was approaching. The day everything was destined to change came unexpectedly for everyone. The restaurant, closed for inspections, temporarily reopened its doors for journalists and officials. Inside gathered the staff who had remained after the scandal. Waiters, administrators, chefs, including those not yet dismissed. Police officers and city officials were present as well. The hall buzzed with tension, cameras capturing every move. At that moment, he walked through the door. a man in a simple shirt, dark jeans, and a light jacket. Those who had seen him before recognized him immediately. That same guest. The hall froze, the murmur fell silent. He walked to the center of the hall and stopped. His stride was calm, his gaze steady. Journalists raised their microphones. And then he said, "My name is Michael Brown. I am not just a customer who came here to dine. I am the owner of this restaurant chain." His words hit like thunder. Shock rippled through the hall. Some gasped, others exchanged glances. Letitia, standing to the side, covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. She had known, but even for her, it was hard to believe now that the truth was spoken aloud. Michael continued. His voice was even, without theatrics, but every word carried the weight of lived experience. That evening, I ordered a simple meal. I came here not as a billionaire, not as an investor, but as a man who wanted to spend an evening in his own restaurant. And what did I receive? Whispers behind my back. Contempt in people's eyes. A spit in the dish prepared for me. He paused. Cameras captured every movement, every breath. I was humiliated, not because I was poor, not because I was a difficult customer. I was humiliated because I am a black man. The hall was silent. Even the most skeptical waiters could not raise their eyes. "This is not only an insult to me," Michael went on. "It is an insult to everyone who has faced the same. To every child told they don't belong. To every family denied service without explanation. To everyone who has ever been stripped of respect simply because of the color of their skin." He looked at the staff. "I did not come here to take revenge. I came here to show you. The truth always comes out." The administrator cracked first. His face went pale, his voice trembling. "Mr. Brown, I didn't know it was you." Michael raised his hand, cutting him off. "That is exactly the problem," he said. "You should not have needed to know who I was. There should be no difference between me and anyone else." His words pierced the hall. Several waiters could not hold back their tears. Letitia stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Forgive us. Forgive us all. I did what I could, but it wasn't enough." Michael stepped closer, nodding gently. "You did enough. You did not stay silent. And that is why we are here today." One of the cooks fell to his knees in the hall. His voice rang with despair. I wasn't the one who did it to the food, but I stayed silent. I laughed with the others. I am ashamed. Forgive me." Others began to follow. Some tearfully begged forgiveness, others stumbled through explanations, some just lowered their heads, unable to meet Michael's eyes. Even Kenneth, who had denied guilt to the very end, now stood pale and quiet. His confidence had evaporated, leaving only confusion. Michael listened to them all in silence. Only when the voices faded did he speak. "Apologies are accepted, but they mean nothing without action. Each of you must decide. Will you remain part of the problem, or will you become part of the solution?" His words fell like both a sentence and a promise. Journalists captured every detail. That day, the story transformed from a scandal into a lesson. The video of a billionaire in simple clothes recounting how he had been humiliated in his own restaurant while the staff wept and apologized spread instantly across the world. It was more than an exposé. It became a symbol. Wealth and status cannot protect against humiliation when society is poisoned by prejudice. For the employees, it was a moment of truth. Many realized they stood at the edge, forced to either acknowledge the reality or lose everything. Michael ended his speech with these words: "I will not allow this place to remain a symbol of hate. It must become a symbol of change." The hall erupted in applause, not joyous clapping, but applause of respect, acknowledgement, and renewal. And the story was only beginning a new chapter. After that day, the world could no longer look at Brown's dining group the same way. The video of Michael's speech went viral. Millions of people around the world saw how a billionaire openly spoke about his own humiliation, while staff, overwhelmed with shame, apologized to him. That video became a symbol not only of exposure, but of hope. The very next day, the board of directors gathered again, and for the first time in a long while, they weren't discussing profits. The new agenda read, company reform, a new code, a new future. Michael entered the boardroom not as the mysterious guest, but as the owner. His presence was met with silence. Everyone understood. He alone would determine whether the company survived or disappeared forever. He began simply, I am ready to save this chain, but only if it changes, radically. His first decision was dismissal. Everyone directly involved in the incident was removed. The chef who committed the offense, the administrator who covered for him, the manager Kenneth, whose passivity had turned a crisis into catastrophe. But Michael went further. He insisted on creating an independent commission to investigate all cases of discrimination within the chain. The commission included human rights advocates, lawyers, and representatives of civic organizations. Their job was not only to find the guilty, but to propose new rules. The centerpiece was the development of a code of equality and dignity. Every employee, from waiter to branch director, was required to sign it. The code declared no distinctions based on skin color, gender, age, or nationality. Any violation meant immediate dismissal and a permanent ban from re-employment in the chain. All complaints from clients and employees would be recorded and reviewed by an independent committee. Annual training on respect and inclusion would be mandatory for all staff. Journalists watched every step closely. Many doubted the company could recover from such a blow. But the first results were surprising. After the guilty parties were dismissed, some employees came to Michael voluntarily and offered to help with the reforms. They said, "We're tired of this atmosphere. We want to work honestly." Even those who had once opposed Letitia began approaching her to apologize. Some admitted they were afraid of losing their jobs. Others confessed they had simply grown used to silence. She accepted their words calmly, always repeating, "What matters is that it doesn't stay just words." A month later, the first restaurant reopened, already reformed. At the entrance hung a sign, "Here, everyone is valued. Here, everyone is respected." Journalists, bloggers, and ordinary guests came to see if it was just empty talk. What they found was a different place entirely. Waiters smiling sincerely, staff treating every guest the same, and on the walls, photographs of people of different skin colors with the caption, "Our strength is in diversity." At first, guests were cautious, but gradually, trust began to return. People shared their impressions on social media. "We believe again. This isn't PR, it's real change. I never thought a simple restaurant visit could move me to tears." The chain was coming back to life. Michael understood the journey would be long, but now it wasn't just a business. It was a mission. He launched a special fund, directing part of the restaurant's profits to it. The money went to educational programs for underprivileged youth, scholarships for students, and anti-discrimination initiatives. Every branch was assigned not only new management, but also mentors people tasked with ensuring the code of equality was more than just words on paper. For the staff, the changes were a hard but vital lesson. Those who once tolerated prejudice now learned to see clients and each other in a new light. Many admitted for the first time that they hadn't even realized how deeply ingrained their stereotypes were. Some couldn't handle it and left, but those who stayed began to take pride in their work. Letitia became the symbol of the entire reform. She was appointed to a leadership role at one of the branches, becoming the first black woman to serve as a restaurant director in the chain. For employees, she was living proof that courage and honesty are rewarded. A year later, the media carried very different headlines. A restaurant chain that survived crisis becomes a model for change. From a symbol of scandal to a symbol of equality. Michael repeated again and again, "What matters is not what happened to us. What matters is what we did after." The staff who had lived through that shameful day now told journalists, "We are ashamed of our past, but proud that we managed to change." Some cried as they recalled apologizing to the owner, not knowing if he would forgive them. But now they themselves had become guardians of the new rules, teaching new hires that such things must never happen again. The story that had begun with spit in a dish and a note on a napkin ended as a lesson for an entire society. It showed that even the richest and strongest can be humiliated if prejudice rules the environment. But it also showed something else, that everyone has a choice, and that choice can change everything.